Congresswoman Giffords' most recent appearance on Horizon was prior to the November election, when she talked about the need for politicians to work together on contentious issues like immigration reform.
You know, the challenge for us in southern Arizona is to take a part of the country that has been ignored for a long, long time. And you have elected officials that have served this area for decades. I mean, the problem did not happen overnight. This is built up over time. You know, I don't care who gets credit for it. Let's just fix the problem. It's not about trying to point fingers, make the governor look bad, make the president look bad, make the legislature look bad. It's like, guys, come on, let's just figure this out.
This was an unusual day at the state capitol. Lawmakers gathered for the opening of the legislative session, but the shootings in Tucson overshadowed the proceedings. Joining us now is Stan Barnes, a former lawmaker who owns the political consulting firm Copper State Consulting. Also here is Democratic Assistant House Minority Leader Steve Farley of Tucson. And also joining us is Secretary of State Ken Bennett. Good to have you all here. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Appreciate it. Ken, let's start with you. The mood at the Capitol. Describe the scene for us.
Mood was mixed. It would normally be a time of celebration and getting things started, and there was just enough of that that you knew it was the first day and the opening day of session, but it certainly was void almost completely of the political overtones that often accompany a State of the State speech, and then reactions from supportive or opposing caucuses in both the Senate and the House. And so it was just more of a day, and I thought the governor and the speaker, both minority and majority leaders, did a perfect job of kind of capturing that middle tone where, as one or many of them said, we're not Republicans or Democrats, we're Arizonans today, and we're not going to try to pretend to ignore what happened on Saturday.
Yeah, I was telling someone outside the chamber that it's probably the most unified opening day I've ever seen in my 22 years of being down there, because after all, we are all together in our grief over this situation. I thought it was a great moment when words were being said by the minority leader, Chad Campbell, in the House, and the majority leader came over to him. They embraced, and I mean, you just don't see that on opening day in the state legislature. It was a great symbolism for the unified feeling that was there today.
Steve, did you see that as well?
There was a lot of hugging there today, all over the place, across boundaries, across the aisle. I had to try to wipe some of the stuff off from the result of that earlier today. But that was part of the intention, I think, from everybody's part. And having lived through these horrible events in Tucson, I was absolutely determined to come up here and change the way we do these politics. And I'm glad you had that clip from Gabby talking about our need to change the way we do politics, our need to come together in a different way, because that's what I'm committed myself to do. And I saw that the Speaker and the Governor will be partners in that quest to change the climate.
What was your impressions? Give us your impressions on the Governor's speech today.
Oh, I thought it was probably her best speech I've heard her give. I think she, it was from the heart, and she struck the right tone, and I thought she just did a great job of keeping Arizonans focused on what we should have been focused on, and not doing anything on the political side, but just calling for everyone to use the events of Saturday to come together and build a better Arizona. And you know, I don't think anyone can pretend that we're not going to have our disagreements in how we do that, but it was total unity in standing as the leader of Arizona, that today we're going to come together and work on making Arizona better. And maybe that's one of the few positive things that come out of such a horrific tragedy.
And Stan, real quickly, as far as State of the State, the address itself, what usually happens? How are these things usually addressed? And how did that differ today?
Yeah, it was entirely different. Today's speech was given at the same time as the State of the State, but it was not a State of the State address. It was a speech only the person in Arizona that represents all of us could say. That the governor of Arizona expressed grief on behalf of all of Arizona. So she was playing out her part as the leader, the chief executive of the state, and said nothing about policy and about her words to the legislature about bills, send me or don't send me, or we're going to do this on the budget, or we're going to do this on other key issues. None of that. the expectation is that that ceremony is just going to be passed this year. And while there is a need for the governor to give direction to the legislature, as the former Senate President can tell you, and as the current representative can tell you, Mr. Farley, legislators hear that for about 2 minutes and then set it aside. Anyway, I think there's an expectation that the governor is going to, in writing, send her words to the leadership of both chambers and let it be at that.
Is that the requirement? You just have to deliver it to the leaders of both chambers, whether
Yeah.
it's a speech or just hand-delivered or something along these lines?
Yes, as much like the President of the United States, there's no requirement that you stand up and make a big speech every year, but there is a mandate of a report on the state of the state, and she can do that in many ways. Given her perfect pitch ear on the nature of what we've got going on here, I think what you'll see is she'll probably write it and send it in, is my guess.
Interesting. We were kind of hearing from Ken over here saying that, you know, no one's going to fool themselves here. There's going to be some divisiveness here, some contentious issues. We're going to hear both sides going back and forth. Is there thought that when both sides go back and forth, things will tone down a little bit? I mean, obviously now it feels that way. Do we really think that's going to last?
I really think it is, and I cannot control what other people do. I can only control myself, and I have made a commitment to myself, which I shared with the Speaker, I shared with Majority Leader Tobin, I shared with the Governor, that I will not engage in hurtful or hateful conversation of any kind. That's over. We cannot do that anymore, and I hope that others will also do the same. And I have faith that we will, but I found it interesting that Majority Leader Tobin gave some remarks on the floor as well. And he talked about this spirit we wanted to do, but he did remind us, we must not let this killer silence our debate either. Debate is a part of democracy as well. And we will have very vociferous debate. We have some very strong differences among us. There's no question about that. But if we can air those strong differences in terms that are honest disagreements about policy, instead of demonization of each other, then we will have achieved something powerful that I think we can spread to the rest of the country as well, because everyone is suffering from this type of lack of civil dialogue.
You've been there. How does leadership do this? If leadership wants to do this, how do they do this?
Well, you do it by example. But that maybe is too simple. I think you do it by building relationships. I have become convinced in the many years I've been involved that influence comes from relationships, and it's building the friendly relationships that we heard amongst Ken and Linda and their friend, Gabby, not their colleague. They may have started as colleagues. And so I think one, it's the example. I think the leaders, the governor, the president, the speaker, the leaders of the caucuses, committee chairs. There's lots of formality in the legislature, lots of opportunity for somebody to say, we're not going to take testimony, or you've had enough, and I think it's going to take everybody, starting at the top, and I think we saw that from the very top today, just setting a different tone and leading by example that we're going to have those disagreements. I couldn't agree more with Steve that we've got such tough issues, but we can do it without being disagreeable. And I think that's really what Gabby stood for. I mean, that's the way Gabby was a legislator. You never wanted her to oppose your position because that's all she would do. She would oppose your position from a well-thought-out, well-studied position. She never attacked you. She was a sweet and kind, but the way she did things had tremendous influence, and it's what I think has made her effective as a legislator and as a representative, going back to her people and wanting to hear them.
22 years ago, I was a freshman on the floor of the House, and I know your viewers are saying you're not old enough, but I was 27 years old. And I was taught as I came into that process, not knowing quite what I'd done as a brand new member, that there is an honoring of each other in this body, because each is a representative of a cadre of Arizonans in all parts of Arizona. And I remember being awed by the old fathers of the day, the old veterans of the legislature, how they would fight like hell on the floor, and then they'd go out and have a beer together and laugh. And that shocked me, and I loved it at the same time. And I remember thinking, what a cool thing about our government, that ideas matter, that people and friendships are separate, and sometimes they help each other come together. Things have, almost from the point and this has happened nationally as well as to Arizona, but almost from that point in the late 80s, things have been in a big sweep the other way, and the honoring of one another has melted down. And it seems to me, based on what I hear from Mr. Farley, what I heard today from the Speaker, and from that matter the Governor, that this might be a moment to reflect on that and to reset how we deal with each other at the state capitol.
And a fortuitous moment to do so, because this is one of the biggest freshman classes we've ever had.
Well
So
said.
there are a tremendous number of people who are just like you were,
Right.
not having any idea how this place works.
Right.
Who, if they're shown by leadership that this is how we treat each other, that will last for many, many years to come.
Yeah, and there are there are rules in the Senate and the House against impugning one another. Many of your viewers probably don't know that, but it's in our rules not to stand up and say he's wrong on this bill because he's got the wrong motivation, or someone's paying him to do something. Their conflict of interest. Those things are not allowed on the floor, and we try to live to those. But beyond that, there is a civility that the place demands, because it is the best form of government. And I love what I'm hearing today on the opening day of our, as the Speaker says, our centennial legislature. That things might reset, and there might be a new awakening of how to treat one another.
The logistics as far as Representative Giffords' seat, I don't know how familiar anyone here is, because it's a question I've been asked numerous times. What happens now if she's out of commission for a while, and it's assuming that she will be, what happens to that seat?
Well, our office has done some research, and initially we thought it was a declaration of a vacancy by the Speaker of the House. But as it turns out, there's only one instance in the history of the country where a House of Representative in Congress seat has been declared vacant. It was in 1981. I think a representative had just been reelected in Maryland and had a heart attack 2 days before the election and slipped into a coma and never recovered. And it was the following mid to late February, so it had to be 4-ish months later, that the U.S. the House of Representatives voted to declare that seat vacant. And then it triggers a special election type process. But I don't expect that there will be any declaration of vacancy as long as Gabby is fighting. And it appears prayerfully right now that that's what's happening. And as the doctors have said, so far there's nothing of a negative connotation, and we just hope and pray that she will continue to recover. And I don't expect that there will be a vacancy declared in this case. If it were to be declared, it begins a process of about 6 months that culminates in a special election.
Not an appointment.
Not an appointment. Interestingly, in a U.S. Senator vacancy, it's a vacancy appointed by the governor until the next election. But in the House of Representatives, special election about 6 months later.
Interesting stuff. All right, we have a few minutes left, 3-4 minutes left. I want to get each one of you to talk about this, because we are Arizona. We're all Arizonans here. I mean, and we've gone through some tough times perceptually around the country. The perception of Arizona, regardless of where you stand, I don't think anyone can say that a lot of folks are holding parades for us right now. What are you hearing regarding the image of Arizona, and what can be done to turn, this used to be the friendliest, most open, come on out and join us, you know, boy howdy kind of a state there. What happened? What's going on here?
Well, I've been talking to my share of reporters in recent days and hours, and a lot of them are asking that question: what's wrong with Arizona? And the way I talk to them is that it isn't that there is anything particular about Arizona that makes us wrong. It's just that we are not having the stories told about the people who are not doing that stuff out there on the edge, and the stuff who is doing sort of the extreme legislation, in my view, that has gotten a lot of public attention from around the country. What we need to focus on is that incredible community spirit we have in Arizona here, where we do come together, and as a community we are able to move forward past difficult things, and this is a tremendous opportunity to do that right now because of how hard this has been. We are not all that we are being portrayed in the media. There's no question about that.
Stan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Representative Farley. We're not all that. I think we've had a bad draw on a couple of stories and commentary by media that generally is based in the East Coast of the United States and has a whole different view of Arizona, much like the way that people in Melbourne look at Perth way out there on the edge of Australia. I think that's the way the East Coast looks at us. But it's also a subject of this. We are growing up as a state. We're going to have 9 congressmen in the next round. We have nearly 7 million people. We're not little old small Arizona anymore. We're getting to be big Arizona, and big draws attention, and big has diversity, and big causes a variety of things to happen. That is as part of our growing up phase, I think. That's part of my theory.
Last point there, Ken. What do you think? Are we just simply growing up? We're not little old Arizona anymore?
Well, I think there's an element of that. But I don't think Arizona is, I don't think the real Arizona, which is really the real Arizonans, are anything like what we have unfortunately been portrayed as over the last maybe year or two, as we've just, I think, for a variety of circumstances, kind of become the focal point or the microcosm of some very difficult debates. I mean, Gabby, in her few minutes just a while ago, talked about we have culminated in some things that have been going on for decades, and we're trying to get some things solved that many have not, and we're going to get that done if we follow the guidance that have been talked about tonight.
Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us. A difficult evening, but a good conversation. We thank you so much.
Thanks so much, and for telling this story.
You betcha.